This is 13 Dead End Drive, and it's one killer board game. It was created by Dr. David Wyman and published by Milton Bradley in 1993. Now you may be noticing that I've got two different board games here on the table, and you're correct. This is 13 Dead End Drive as originally created in 1993. Today I've got a 2023 anniversary edition. This is a 30th anniversary edition by Winning Moves Games. It still retains all of the original art from Andrew Burton and Michael Gray, and it's the original game as designed by Dr. Wyman and Michael Mara. Now, this version here, 1313 Dead End Drive, is actually a Parker Brothers release from 2002. And I don't know if I'd call it a sequel, but I'd say it's more of a spiritual successor to 13 Dead End Drive. Game designer Michael Mara teamed back up with artist Andrew Burton and created this game here, 1313 Dead End Drive, which has a slightly modified rule set from the original 13 Dead End Drive. You'll also notice that there's a large departure in the style of art, and that can be attributed to the artist Bill Concannon, who took over the art on 1313 Dead End Drive. So you actually get two really unique flavors of a very similar gameplay with these two titles. Now, like I said, 13 Dead End Drive was originally published in 1993 by Milton Bradley. Today I thought this would be a really cool comparison to go after these two games because there are actual changes to the art and rule set. I understand that this 2023 edition from Winning Moves will have some material differences between it and the 1993 Milton Bradley release, but overall the gameplay has stayed unchanged and the art is just the same. So maybe in the future we'll do a comparison of the 1993 to the 2023 edition. But for today, let's have a look at what changed and what stayed the same between these two titles, 13 Dead End Drive and 1313 Dead End Drive. Now, let's start with 13 Dead End Drive, the 2023 Winning Moves edition, with the game box and art. So this is actually really similar to the original 13 Dead End Drive's art with the Milton Bradley branding. However, you'll notice this box is a little bit smaller. We have these corner portraits on the lower portion of the box, and the original 13 Dead End Drive actually had a few on the upper corners as well, and the box was a little bit wider. So the modern version, I think, was shrunk down as the board folds into quarters. So I imagine that they probably shrunk it down to fit. Now, the back of the box features a photo of the game board, a little bit of information about what the gameplay is like. Pretty classic and pretty standard fare for most board game boxes. And one thing that I really like is it is a two-piece box, very nice tolerances too. So the lid lifts off, you have plenty of space to store everything, and I love this little insert here that actually has some backstory to all 12 of the characters involved in the game. Actually 13 if you count poor deceased Aunt Agatha, or rather rich deceased Aunt Agatha. We'll get to that in a minute. Anyway, this is an excellent game box. Very classic design with the lift-off lid. Plenty of room for storage, albeit some of the traps need to be disassembled a little bit more than others to fit in there. Oh, there we go. Oh no, I'm knocking down traps too. I knocked the suit of armor over from 1313. There we go. Okay, moving to the 1313 Dead End Drive box. This is 2002's revival of the franchise here. Now this has some striking art. I actually really enjoy the color palette. Very whimsical font that they chose for the titling here. When we flip it over, that's my fault for putting the lid on crooked last time here. But we have a nice picture of the game board here. Brief explanation of what the gameplay is like, and we can see all the parts laid out on the table. So again, pretty standard fare for most board game boxes. It's a lift-off top box. Very generous depth. Again, the board folds into quarters, so obviously it can fit in there. Now, you'll see I have a couple of Ziploc bags. They did give a couple extra plastic pieces, which are structural. They're used for this backdrop and some for the characters there, so it's nice to have some extras. I would say you probably don't actually need Ziplocs like what I did. However, I like to keep the cards separate and clean and keep some of the smaller parts together, especially if I have spares. So both boxes, though, are well designed for storage. So I wouldn't advise that you really need any extras or anything. Maybe something to keep the cards clean, but that's about it. Now let's have a look at the games themselves, starting with this 2023 edition of 13 Dead End Drive by Winning Moves. First off, the art is striking. This hand-painted cartoony style, I'm just in love with it. I love how the individual characters, the art for each one of these characters is unique, and they have these great overblown, over-exaggerated sort of caricature appearances that really play into what the archetype is. I mean, you have Clay, the tennis coach, and he is incredibly handsome. This guy knows how to coach tennis, if you know what I mean. I love it. It fits. You got the butler with his sneering disdain and his nose turned up and everything. I love it. His name is Smothers too. Smothers. It's awesome. They all have great backstories, like I said earlier. So read that insert if you get this game. I think it even talks about what their intention to spend the money on is afterwards. So it's awesome. The point of the game is to be the heir that inherits deceased Aunt Agatha's fortune. You can see her money is stuffed in every nook and cranny of this mansion. There are dollar bills popping out of everything. There's even like a bag of money in the little grandfather clock. I just love those little details. So how it works is you have 12 potential heirs who have all gathered at the mansion for the reading of Aunt Agatha's will. Before the game, 2 to 4 players are dealt these character cards. There's also a deck of matching character cards up here in this portrait holder. We'll get to that in a second here. But each player will have a certain amount of these character cards. Now, these character cards are their characters, and if one of these characters survives, that player wins. Then there's this deck of cards here. These are your trap cards. This will be placed on the table within reach of all of the players, and this sort of progresses the story along as we attempt to trap and possibly kill other heirs in our competition to earn the fortune. So, at the outset of the game, Agatha's portrait is removed, and whoever the first heir on the will is will be displayed here. At this point on, the player who owns the same matching heir card as the heir who's displayed here will want to try to get that heir out the front door alive while their portrait is still on display. If they do, they inherit that fortune. Now, all the other players will try to kill that particular heir by navigating that player piece to one of these trap spaces signified with a little skull and crossbones here. If they navigate that heir to one of these trap spaces, that's when these trap cards come into play. The player who navigated that heir to that trap space can draw for a chance to kill that character. Now, in this instance, I drew the detective card, and that's where the real pressure is on. So this is the detective character. He starts way over here at the end of the sidewalk. And each time I draw one of these detective cards, he moves one space closer to the front door. If the detective reaches the front door, the game is over. So let's say Clay is alive and his portrait is up here, and the detective reaches the front door. Clay inherits the fortune and wins the game. Again, if Clay navigates his way out the front door before the detective even gets here and his portrait's up there, Clay wins. Now, the other victory parameter is, let's say Clay is my card and he doesn't even need to have his portrait up here, but he happens to be the last person alive in the mansion. He also wins. So your choice is try to kill all the other heirs, or escape, or survive long enough to be rescued by the detective. So now the chase is on. Now also, if I draw a detective card, I actually play that, move the detective, and get the chance to draw another trap card. In this instance, I didn't draw a trap that Clay is next to. So I can't set off a trap, but I can't draw another card, and now my turn is over. Now let's say I draw the correct trap. Oh, I don't even have an example. Oh, I got a wild card. Here we go. So I draw a wild, and I can spring the bookcase on him. Well, I might strategically choose not to spring it at that time. For instance, Clay might actually be one of my characters, and to prevent somebody else from killing him, I could navigate him to a trap, draw the correct trap, and say, oh gee, I don't know, I'd bluff it and say, I don't have that trap, I can't set it off. Well, now in order for Clay's life to be at risk, another player has to navigate them off the trap, but they can't navigate him back to another space he's been on until the following turn, buying Clay a little bit of time. So that's where the strategy comes in. You see, every player can move every one of these heirs, and you never know who owns whose heir card. And to do these moves, players will roll these 2 die. Now, in this instance, wow, I got doubles. This is neat because it's actually something that has to do with the game. So if I roll doubles, I can actually choose to change who's in the portrait by drawing the top card off and revealing the next person in line. So let's say I didn't own Clay, but I did own the chef here. What is the chef's name here? Oh, just the chef. So let's say I own the chef's card. Well, now I want to get the chef out alive, and maybe if I own Clay, I want to kill the chef so that he doesn't get out alive. So as you can see, the story becomes dog eat dog very quickly. Now, for each one of these die, I can move a different heir, the amount of spaces displayed on the die. I cannot combine those unless I get doubles. So again, some further limitations. Also, a neat little thing is most of the rooms have secret passageways allowing you to navigate the mansion really quickly, which again, very reminiscent of Clue. I love how this game has multiple strategies to win. The traps are kinetic and lots of fun, albeit there are some design shortcomings. Like I feel the chandelier extends a little bit far forward of the actual trap space. So I've had it not knock over the player effectively. However, that being said, if you draw the correct trap and they're on the space, you don't have to actually rely on the mechanism to get the kill. They arguably have been killed and moved on. But if you wanted to say add a house rule that the trap has to work, I'm going to tell you the riskiest one's going to be the chandelier, because all the other ones are pretty much a sure thing. It's very easy to knock over these cardboard characters, but the traps are really there for the theatricality of the trap, and that tracks. Because if you look at the game itself, theatricality is really what this design is all about. This board, like I said, is gorgeous. I love everything about it. The color palette's great. The design of the traps, I love the little 3D. I love any kind of board that has any sort of like 3D gimmick. I don't know why, but that just tickles me with these board games. So this one just checks all the boxes. You have bluffing, you've got the murder mystery motif. You have this sort of, I wouldn't even call it horror, just spooky. You know, and that's great. Like the kind of spooky stuff, this would be perfect to play on Halloween or like a nice autumn evening. You know what I mean? This is a perfect cozy party game. So I'm a big fan of the original 13 Dead End Drive. I'm so glad that I've played it. Now let's have a look at the spiritual successor from Parker Brothers. Now this is the 2002 release, 1313 Dead End Drive. Now, like I said before, Michael Mara teamed up with artist Andrew Burton, and they reworked the rules. Now you'll notice there's quite a bit of a departure in the art style from 1313 Dead End Drive and 13 Dead End Drive. Now, this was lead artist Bill Concannon who did this, and this is more of like a Global Village coffee house motif, which is a really popular aesthetic around the time of the late 90s, early 2000s. So you're going to see the heavy uses of color, and you got a little bit of surrealism mixed with cubism in this. So the characters don't look quite so much like caricatures when you compare them to the originals. The original character pieces have kind of like a three-quarter portrait, whereas this, they portray the entire character, but with a really large cartoony head and a tiny body, which is congruent with this sort of art style here. We saw a lot of this again in this era. The bright, vibrant colors are neat. I really do enjoy the exaggerated character design. The mansion is very lively. There's a lot of wild shapes and like hardly anything comes to a 90-degree angle. One thing that I will applaud that I absolutely love is if you look at the coloration on the board, one thing that's really eye-catching is that there's this sense of illumination coming off the table, which is the focal point. I mean, this is the start of every game and the reading of the will, but you can actually see they took into consideration rendering the light rays over the floor out of that room. It adds a really nice warm glow to the map. Now, overall, it does have a much more absurdist, cartoony look. I think that's to kind of keep, you know, when you're playing a game that actually condones and encourages essentially murder, you have to make sure that everybody knows this is just a joke. This is just fun. So both of these games have a very whimsical tone to them, which is good because the mood would be too dark if either one of them were designed to be too serious. Now, the rule set has changed. You're going to notice that you don't have a portrait of Aunt Agatha anymore. Instead, you'll see on the far side of the table from me, and I'll show you a close-up, we have a will, and this will is progressive. Instead of 12 possible heirs, we now have 13 possible heirs. Again, players will be issued heir cards throughout the game, or actually, I shouldn't say throughout the game, at the outset of the game. Throughout the game, the heir cards actually have the potential to change in this one, which is really fascinating. Again, we also have our trap cards here, but the trap cards feature, instead of having a detective coming to the door, the very bottom card is a card that says the clock strikes midnight. So players will play until all of the cards have been drawn, one person survives, or everybody who's alive escapes. Now, this is interesting because you don't actually have to be the last alive. Because you have this progressive will, how it starts is any player on the will, if that character dies, the money bag token that's under them moves to the next person in line progressively. Anybody who gets their heir out the front door gets to take whatever money bag tokens are under them. So you can actually pretty much immediately set about trying to escape the house with whatever you have, because the winning parameter is determined by who has the most money at the end of the game. So you might get out with like get out with like 3 or 4 heirs completely alive, but only inherit $3 or $4 million, where somebody can escape with 1 heir and a huge load of $1 million game chips, all by strategically knocking off the competition. They've also changed the movement rules. In the original 13 dead-end drive, a character could not move back over a space they had been on that move. So for instance, I could strategically put a character on a trap space, meaning another player couldn't move him off and back on in the same move. In 13 dead-end drive, you can navigate back onto another space. So that means that it's easier to land character heirs on these traps and get them killed. So it's easier to kill characters, it's easier to escape with characters, and the game is guaranteed to last just a little bit longer, because in order to get to the clock strikes midnight, which is the same parameter or winning and losing parameter as the detective getting to the front door, you have to draw all of these cards, all of these trap cards. Now, they have some interesting rules with movement. Again, it's the same as with the original when you roll doubles, except for you're not changing heirs. So if I were to roll doubles, I can combine that movement amount to 1 heir. Otherwise, whatever I roll, I have to divvy up my movement between 2 separate heirs. So if I roll, say, a 3 and a 1, I can move 1 heir 1 space and 1 heir 3 spaces. So that much stayed the same. The traps are largely unchanged in theme, save for the boar's head replaces the chandelier. So in 1313 Dead End Drive, instead of having a chandelier drop onto this trap space over here, the trap space has been relocated towards this backer wall, and then a boar's head can be dropped on whoever's on that trap space. It works much more reliably than the chandelier. And another thing I noticed when playing 13 Dead End Drive is at one point when I was playing with adults, I hate to say it, but sometimes we were hesitant to set off a trap because we wanted to keep track of which other players were on the board. I'll give you an example. Let's say I have one player on a trap here and I have another player located here. Well, if I set off the trap, I run the risk of the chandelier, oh, it didn't that time, but the chandelier knocking over both characters, and I would lose track of which space this side character who did not get killed would be on. Because, of course, you can't count them as dead. They're not on a trap space. That's not how the game plays. But as you can understand, it became difficult to keep track of where players were when they kept getting knocked over. The way the spaces are divvied up in 1313 Dead End Drive and the locations of the traps kind of address this problem. So they make it easier for you to use these kinetic traps without necessarily affecting somebody else's player piece to the same degree. Most of the traps stay pretty localized to where that character is. So it's easier to not lose track. Also, adding more heirs to play with, and like I said, the chain of inheritance really changes up the strategy of the game. Also, the bookcase has been replaced with an Agatha safe. I thought this one was kind of neat. It's a safe with a little lever on the side, and when you push the lever, a little metal pig comes out and crushes whoever is in front of the safe. So I don't know if that's supposed to be a piggy bank or what, but I don't know. It's a hilarious thematic change. The knight, or I should say the suit of armor, is still featured in the game. However, they rotated it to the side here. I'm not sure why they did that, but I think it's more or less to keep less collateral damage on the map. I noticed the rooms aren't as generously sized as well. The board is really similar in size. I didn't actually get out a tape measure. I should have here because I know that this is obviously a little bit wider. But when it comes to how it affects the gameplay, the biggest thing that I notice is the spaces as depicted in 1313 Dead End Drive are significantly more stylized. They're not as uniformly shaped. We have a lot of exact squares in 13 Dead End Drive. Whereas in 1313 Dead End Drive, these shapes are more well-rounded, stylized, a little bit more whimsical and curvy, and so the map is changed quite a bit. In fact, one little piece of confusion that a lot of people have is right in front of the fireplace trap here on 1313 Dead End Drive, there's a bearskin rug, and that actually does not count as a space. So it can be frustrating for players because there are these little spaces with arrows on them, and these spaces basically signify a character being within range of this trap here. That's how they can move into the trap spaces, are those little arrows, and there's only one on either side of that bear rug, so you have all of this space to get them to the fireplace, but they're actually limited to 2 spaces. Now, this is by design, so that character navigation plays out a certain way. But again, it can be a little confusing, as the original rules also state that you cannot move your characters over furniture. So for instance, there's a Egyptian sarcophagus or a table with a bowl of fruit or a sofa here. Characters can't occupy those spaces. Now, artistically, in 1313 Dead End Drive, spaces that characters can't occupy are significantly more stylized to make them easier to recognize. So I will applaud them for that. Now when we actually are looking at some of these art differences, it's kind of interesting to see how motivations in the game's rule changes could affect how the board is laid out. So I thought that was really fascinating. Now, before we get too far into the nuts and bolts and comparing these games, let's get to the rules themselves, as in the rule books, starting with this 2023 edition of 13 Dead End Drive. Now, one thing that I'm really enjoying here is you got 2 different books. You have an assembly book. So this is actually more of like a fold out. But the first time you put this game together, you have to punch out a lot of cardboard pieces, put together a lot of plastic fasteners. And I really appreciate the work that went into this. This is color print, unsealed paper, just a nice, easy fold out, not gonna wear out anytime soon. And this one is really needed just once at the initial setup. After that, most of the pieces stay put together in storage and you don't need to worry about it. So there's a basic assembly note here that says consult the other manual, but these are the rules on the rule book, which I think is hilarious. But again, the rule book shows you how to set up the board and place everything. So I would say it's not assembly, just initial game setup. Generous rules, very easy to understand. They explain All the dynamics of the game here. Got this little fold out. Look at that. Covering my face right up for you. This is going to stand the test of time. Unsealed paper, single color print. Actually, no, it does have some extra on their socials there, but they don't really waste a whole lot here in the rules. It gets right down to it, easily explains everything very concisely. So good rule book foldouts here that'll last the test of time. 1313 Dead End Drive. They really got me here. They have a nice saddle stitched booklet. So, and this is shiny sealed paper, full color print. Includes assembly instructions right on the nose. And then we go through and again, full color so you can easily identify all the cards, the bits and bobs and pieces. They even talk about on the back page how best to put everything back in the box for easy storage, which, that just, this pleases the couch. So I like that a lot. Anyway, great rule book here for 1313 Dead End Drive. So on to the actual comparison of these two games. We've looked at the art, we've looked at the rule changes and basic gameplay here. I gotta say, I really appreciate both of these games for their own individual merits. They are two different flavors of the same theme and both worth a play. I would love, like I said before, I'd love to get a comparison of this 2023 30th anniversary edition to the original 1993 and really see the material differences on the board. I surmise that the original board, I think, is just folded in half, if I'm not mistaken. And so in a lot of those instances, you'll have the taped edges, whereas this is just exposed tag board here, which I never really like game boards that have exposed edges. Which another thing that I really like about 1313 is the fit and finish of this game board is just phenomenal. One of my only complaints is these little plastic clips that hold the backer up. The tolerance is very tight, and it actually was to the point where I had to use a pocket knife to tease them open a little bit to slide the cardboard in because it was damaging the backdrop too much. Also, the holes cut for them to poke on through. It's basically a little disc with a clip on the top, 90-degree angle. So there's a small hole cut in the board here for that to poke through, and it could have been about 1/8 of an inch longer to fit more flush. So the back of the board, I kind of had to push these down. I hate pushing plastic onto cardboard to get things to fit because it just naturally damages stuff, but not really the end of the world. The tolerances are tight enough that everything holds up really nicely. The traps work really well. They learned from some of the traps in 13 Dead End Drive. I'm not gonna lie, these traps are effective for what they are, but I understand why some of the thematic changes were made. The fireplace, I'm not a huge fan of it spinning or rotating because it's not as smooth as just flipping a switch, and it doesn't look as neat as when you flip a switch and somebody just falls back into the fire in 13 Dead End Drive, so not a fan of that. The boar's head works more reliably than the chandelier. You've seen me let it off a couple times already, and the chandelier could probably be shortened about, I'd say, 1/2 inch or so, 1 centimeter on this little arm that reaches out, and it would hit its desired position a little bit better. So, like I said, it seems to me that when the traps were being designed for 1313 Dead End Drive, they were reworked just enough to make them effective in such a way that they didn't interrupt the game for the other air pieces on the board, which I like that. They still can, but not to the degree that these other ones. And also they just plain work more reliably as far as satisfactorily knocking over the pieces. Art style, this has a lot to offer. This is going to be divisive in the comment section, I think, because I know that a lot of people are huge fans of the Global Village Coffee House aesthetic. I'm more of a Vaporwave guy myself, but that's neither here nor there, because neither one of these games feature that. I will say I prefer the art style on 13 Dead End Drive. Like I said, it's more reminiscent of Clue and the classic whodunit mystery thing. But I do appreciate the riff. The color on 1313 Dead End Drive is great. The absurdist shapes and everything, very cartoony. I like that. It kind of makes me think of Scooby-Doo, you know what I mean? And the art style for each one of the little characters, I mean, some of the characters actually return. Like we still have Clay here. So we have two different versions of Clay. Both of them look equally snobby, but they're great interpretations of clearly the same character. Just one is a completely different art style than the other, and I think that that's great. I like to have different flavors of both art and gameplay with my games. So I would say that I prefer this motif, but I'm not going to dog on 1313 Dead End Drive for stepping out, trying something new, and also, again, by being a bit more cartoony and whimsical, it makes the murder theme seem a lot more palatable, which I think is very important. I mean, when you really deconstruct the theme of this game, it's dark. It's dark. I mean, you're racing to either survive or kill off about a dozen other people. So, but they managed to make it whimsical and fun in both iterations of the game. I love the scoring mechanic in 1313 Dead End Drive. It adds a whole new layer of strategy to the game. There's also, I forgot to mention here, you get the opportunity to steal other people's air cards. When you're drawing these cards, you might get a card that says take an air card when you're drawing these action cards or trap cards, and somebody has to hold out their hand and you draw one blind. So whoever you have the motivation to save or kill can change at any time during the game, which is an awesome dynamic. So again, there's so many more ways for the game to change direction in 1313 Dead End Drive. Now, I actually do kind of like being a bit more secure in who I have in my hand in 13 Dead End Drive. So again, it's a flavor thing. If you want it to be a bit more chaotic and a bit more fast-paced, I think 1313 Dead End Drive will probably be right up your alley. If you want to bluff a bit more and you want something with a little bit slower of a pace, I think 13 Dead End Drive will be your baby. So yeah, I mean, I think they're both excellent games. I don't want to recommend one over the other. I'm glad that I have both to choose from, because I could honestly see setting up one, playing a few rounds, and then to change it up, setting up the other, and just going in rapid succession. The game might seem complicated at first, but it's very easy to get a group of people up to speed and playing it. One playthrough usually has everybody very comfortable. So that's another thing that I like, is introducing new players to this game is particularly easy. So yeah, 13 Dead End Drive, excellent game. I highly recommend, if you're going to get it, go with either version. They're going to be awesome. I guess go with whichever one you think is going to be your favorite. Do you want fast-paced or do you want slow burn? So which one is your favorite? 13 Dead End Drive or 1313 Dead End Drive? Comment below and let me know. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.